It's ad break time. First, I'm going to be a little selfish and remind you all that Queen of Spies, a solo game I designed with David Thompson, is currently live on GameFound. It is about running a spy ring in World War I Belgium, and I am very proud of it. I am also proud to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. Right now, they have a fun new project on the way. The Cracked Mirror, a downloadable expansion for 500-year-old vampire, turns the game into an epistolary game for 1 to 2 players. The expansion will be available for free in 2026, but you can get it now for a small donation. And trust me, every donation helps CLGS as they continue their mission of producing peer-reviewed games in the academic space. It is pioneering work that no one else is doing yet. For now, though, let's get on with the show. Hey, gamers, this is Liz Davis from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here for this finale of season 11 of the podcast with a recent friend that I have now made, Adam Blinkinsop. He's a developer at GMT, and he's notably the developer of Red Desk Rebellion and the non-GMT game Shinjuku. We'll also discuss his own design work later this episode, especially Echo from the Dark. How you doing today, Adam?
Pretty good. It's nice and early where I am, but I've had coffee and I've done some work already, so feeling ready to go.
An early morning man. I appreciate that.
Right.
So you and I met at SD HisCon. I'd never met you before, and I just really thought playing games with you was fun. But are you at a lot of gaming conventions? Just to
more and more these days. I go to a lot of small conventions up in the Pacific Northwest where I am. I actually started going to role-playing game conventions pre-pandemic. And that's where I met a lot of gaming people and had a good time out here. But these days I'm going because I want to demo to people who haven't seen the game yet. And so it's like finding groups where it's a reasonable place to go is tricky. But yeah, travel is just a whole situation sometimes. So, but I mean, I also saw you at Circle DC, but we didn't get to actually meet out there because I was busy.
yeah.
Trying to go to more conventions because it's a fun time.
Well, definitely go to Circle DC again because that's my favorite actually.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So what I want to talk about this episode is first your life as a developer, and then I want to connect that to your life as a designer. I always think it's very interesting. Like I feel like I kind of do both now too, and it feels really different to me to do one kind of work over the other. Even though it's still tinkering with games. So your life as a developer, how did that begin?
So about 15 years ago, I started working on games in kind of a small group that we formed at work. And so at lunchtime or after work, we would be playing stuff and making stuff. And getting a lot of practice seeing what plays and seeing what our tastes are and seeing how you can make things work and that kind of stuff. And I said, we should start publishing stuff. We should start doing some things. And I know this company GMT that's really fun, and I want to make some war games at some point. So maybe I'll try and find my way to getting people at GMT to pay attention to me, and then eventually I'll be able to make a game with them. And so in I think 2017 or 18, Jason Carr and I actually went to the Jason Carr, like lead dev at GMT. We went to our weekend at the warehouse. Our first one was the same year in like 2017 or 18. And at around that time, Bruce Mansfield was working on Gandhi and trying to figure out how to make his solo bot work, because we changed the bots from this big flowchart system to Bruce has a genius kind of card system that's a little bit less predictable, which is great. And so I weaseled my way into those discussions and then worked with them to help build a bit of software to kind of automate tracking how you went through the bot, so that we could say, oh yeah, this particular part of the card never got hit, or these decisions never were true or never were false. so we could optimize the card layout. I think there were a couple cards that got significantly changed because of that. So I was like, oh, cool. I've got my way in. I know some people. I know a person who's designed a thing. I know somebody who's developing things. And then Voco put out a call for, hey, we're looking for developers for Red Dust Rebellion. And I was like, hey, that sounds cool. I've got some time. It's 2019. I've got a little bit of room in my work schedule. There's nothing else going on. And I'd love to do some dev work, because if I do some dev work, then Gene will know I actually finish things, and then we can talk about stuff. I was like, that sounds great. How much time do you think this is going to take, Voco? And he said, oh, a couple months, maybe. It'll be fine. No big deal. I have that saved in my design group's Discord as a kind of a memento mori, or a reminder that it's hard to predict things, especially the future. And then immediately after the pandemic hit, immediately after the designer who was in New Zealand everybody had some life troubles, and so things were really tricky. And so it took a little longer than we thought it might take. Which was a fun time. But at the end of that process, I was like, in the middle of that process, I was like, hey, I also have some games that I want to make. And they're like, well, why don't you just bring those games? And I was like, oh, I could have just done that at the first. And they're like, yeah, you could have just didn't have to do any of this other stuff. Like, just bring a game to place. We'll check it out. So I think I spent about 7 years longer than I had to waiting to get something printed. But you live and you learn, right?
That's fantastic. So, okay, I do want to press you about something based on our conversations, though. So you mentioned that you kind of got started looking at the Gandhi solo bot. I did not get the impression that you loved solo design.
No, but I like thinking about systems. And one of the things that Bruce did with that system, like while we were at the thing at the warehouse, I was also he was talking to Jerry White about the graphic design of the system and how do you simplify, and how do we work the ergonomics so that if somebody's sitting here holding the cards, can they reasonably play and hold the cards? Like, what are we doing with both hands? All this kind of discussion, which is so interesting. And so I love thinking about how do all of these systems interact in a fun way. And from that angle, solo is very interesting. Like, I've written all sorts of pieces of software to run other games. I've written, of course, a chess bot, because everybody's got to write a chess bot. But I've also written I learned one language by writing a solver for Mastermind. And then now Mastermind's no fun anymore. I mean, at the time it wasn't great fun, but now it's just completely no fun. So I'm like, oh, I know how to prove a solution for this at this point. But yeah, it's kind of a tricky spot. The my therapist in 2021, when I was in the middle of fighting with the RDR solo system, before Joe fortunately grabbed it from me and made it actually good. My therapist was like, maybe you should think about why you don't like solo as a sitting with yourself kind of a thing. Because a lot of my time with games, a lot of the fun part about games is just hanging out with other people and talking and hosting, which is my favorite part of game time. So
that's pretty funny. So the alone together aspect, it holds throughout all of solo gaming and design as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean the solo that I really tend to like are ones that are kind of generating interesting narratives, generating a story. I had a really good time with that one square card map, seventh continent, eighth continent.
Oh yeah, seventh continent.
That's really cool. I think there's a couple of things like that where just understanding the amount of stuff that somebody's poured into this idea is so interesting, and understanding the system. But then even with Seventh Continent, I'm like, okay, I get the system. This thing is so massive. I don't want to play the game to see the massive thing. It's like going into Elder Scrolls and turning on God mode. It's like I just want to see the content that somebody's put in here. I don't want to see the card that says I die 50 times. Like that's not the part that's interesting to me. So
That's
um,
very fair.
yeah, it gets into a weird spot. But every so often I'll play, like patience type card solitaire, and I've got a way of playing combat commander solitaire that I think is a good time. But yeah, things like that make it kind of tricky.
Interesting. So as a developer, you've been at it for a while now. What do you think makes for a good game developer versus a designer, which we'll talk about later?
Yeah, I feel like development's very much an editor kind of role. Um, and so at the end, it's not your material, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so if we get to the end of the development process and the designer goes, "Oh yeah, this is what I meant to make," then I think that's the best kind of outcome. Um, I am not making very much money on development work, and so my incentives are very much aligned with the artist. I just want the art to be good at the end. Um, there's certainly a piece here that is, can we publish this thing at all? Like, if somebody comes and they're like, I've got this piece of this mechanic, and it requires this custom made piece that's a huge tower that lights up or something, right? It's like, well, let's talk about whether we could do this in a way that could actually be publishable. But in general, with is the audience going to like it? The nice thing about working with GMT is that P500 kind of covers a lot of that boat in many cases, although the audience doesn't always appear in the right place. So I don't have to think about it too hard. But I think the really tricky thing with development in that mindset is understanding what the designer actually wants, because sometimes the designer's not totally sure. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of fun conversations around, hey, it looks like you're doing this and it feels this way. Is that the experience that you're looking for? When we were playing Redist Rebellion, a lot of the conversation that I was having with Jay was about how does the church work and how do we want the church to work? How should they feel? And Jay's big push was he wanted them to feel scary. He wanted them to feel like they could come out of nowhere. He wanted them to just feel like a big randomizer on the board. And I was like, well, it didn't at that time in 2019, 2020. And so I kept pushing him until he came up with a hand of cards system. And then we were like, oh yeah, now it feels like that. Now all the play testers think it feels like that. So now we're in a reasonably good spot. But I had similar conversations with Gary about Shinjuku. Shinjuku, kind of a route building, pick up and deliver Mancala game. It's really cool. Much faster than RDR, which makes it much more fun to play test sometimes. But with Gary, his playtesters would often say that it was frustrating to not know where the customers were going to show up. Kind of this game feels like I should be able to do a bit of planning. The experience is one where I'm playing off of somebody else's investments and they're playing off of mine, and we're all in a shared space. And so the conversations that we would have is, well, do you want this to be a lighter game or a heavier game? Do you want people to be planning ahead 5 or 6 turns, or do you want people to kind of play more tactically? And that led to very different solutions because we wanted a bit more of a thinky game. And if he had wanted it to be a lighter game, then we could have pushed it in that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. This actually reminds me a lot of, it is like editing, of talking to people about their research in grad school, because it was like, okay, I feel like you're trying to make this point, but like, is that the point? And then how do we make the point shine?
Oh yeah. I mean, the great thing about war game development too is that you not only have the author's idea, the designer's ideas, but we also have the historical ideas. And it's like, okay, I know a bit about Napoleonics. If somebody gave me a Napoleonics game to dev, which I saw a couple at Circle DC, it's like, well, I don't think this is how why this battle went this way. Can you tell me why you think it went this way? Or are you just throwing some dice on the map, right?
Right.
With Red Dust Rebellion, I went through and I read a bunch of Mars related sci-fi. Jay is much more of he was inspired a lot by Babylon 5 and that kind of stuff. And so
Yeah.
he had his sci-fi base, and I wanted to make sure we were covered on Kim Stanley Robinson and that kind of thing.
I
Um,
just started Red Mars, so
oh,
I'm very
it's
pleased
so
that
good.
you
It's a
do
great
that.
but like the thing that comes out of those books that hits you immediately is how dangerous things are. And Jay
Yes.
already had that in his background, but I was like, how can we really emphasize some of this stuff? Which is super helpful from a war game design standpoint, because especially for the games that GMT is trying to publish, uh, the designer's saying something, and whether they're intending to say the thing they're saying or not hardly matters. They are definitely saying something. The This is why the Russian advance failed, or this is why this campaign went the way that it did. And if the designer hasn't thought about that in a way that makes it detailed enough to worry about, then what are we even doing here? Like, come on.
It's
If
a
I'm
good
going to sit here
question.
and play a game for 4 hours, then I want it to say something intentional.
So, here's a question. If you're I mean, obviously, early on, you knew that you wanted to talk to GMT, and so you're gonna do something that GMT pulled an all call out for. But when you are now I'm assuming you're choosing your projects more now as a developer. Um,
I
what
mean, I'm
makes
certainly choosing which ones I'm not going to do.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, that leads to the question of how do you decide if something is a match for you as a dev or not?
Ooh, I mean, that's for GMT. It's tricky because we have a couple of full time devs like Joe, who's astounding, Joe Dewars. Um, and for the full time devs, the question for them is, are you free? For one, and for two, is this in your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
But for me, who's not a full time dev, the question is, first, are you free at all? Like that cuts a lot of projects out, because I'm working on stuff, so whether I have room or not is tricky. But even when I was a little bit more free, Jason and the team, they know what I'm interested in. And so, they're not going to bring me a solitaire only game about World War II. Like, that's not my space.
What?
Crazy. Uh, but whenever
No
Napoleonic
night
games
wishes
show
for
up,
you.
whenever Napoleonic designs show up, they pull me into the conversation to at least look at, hey, does this work the way that it's supposed to work? They think that they're going to do this campaign and they're going to apply it to this campaign. Does that make any sense? Did things change too much? That kind of stuff. I'm also one of the bigger players of like Here I Stand in that system. And so when things that come up in that system show up for GMT, they tend to pull me in as, you have experience here. Does this still feel like it's in this system? Is it too far of much of a stretch? That kind of thing. But like, I'm not a Twilight Struggle person. I know enough about Twilight Struggle to be able to play it, but I'm not great at it. Jason's the Twilight Struggle person, so he tends to just take those. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting spot, because there are certainly designers I've met where any project they'd work on, I'd love to be involved in any way. Like, if John Butterfield is working on a project, I would love to help in any way I can, right? Or Jeremy White, if he's working on a thing, I definitely want to see it. I don't know if I can help, because Jerry's kind of got it all covered in many cases. But yeah, there's certainly designers where it wouldn't matter what topic it was. But in general, it's, if I don't have a lot of experience with a subject, it's a lot trickier to say, this person's saying this. Do I need to go read for 2 years to really understand their thesis statement or not? Yeah, that gets complicated.
Yeah. The reading part is fun for games that I am actively designing myself, but yeah. So you also, one of the things that we emphasized, right, is that you worked on Shinjuku, the non-GMT game. Like, you
Mhm,
contain multitudes, you like a variety of games and topics.
mhm.
So, when it comes, you mentioned, you prefer like a Napoleonics game among historical games. But when something is not historical, how do you anchor to feel like you have something to say about what the designer's trying to say?
Yeah, I think a big piece here is that you don't always have to be modeling a thing necessarily. I've got a trick-taking game that I have been working on forever, that is really looking into how do we make a partnership trick-taking game really care about the partnerships, and make it so that you feel like the team is the number one thing, and that's the primary experience, right? I'm a musician, as we talked about before the cast, and a lot of the music that I make is what is the emotion that I want to grab. And sometimes the emotion is just it's make you want to dance, like that's the only emotion. But sometimes it's chill, and sometimes it's sad, and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't think you necessarily have to be modeling a real thing to have something that you're trying to say or have an experience that you're trying to build. There's also just the kind of more common hobby game goal of I have a really interesting puzzle and I want to present that to the players in a way that's going to be fun to interact with. The terrible word fun, right? Uh, and looking at games through that kind of lens of can people interact with this for a long enough time that it feels like it's worth it, is always a useful lens as a designer developer.
Yeah. But fun, nobody has fun anymore. No, I'm kidding. Why did you say it's a dreaded word? I'm actually I love talking about this whenever it comes up, but this sounds like a different angle than usual.
So I have a podcast that Sage Latora, one of the designers of Dungeon World, and I did for a year or two before he had kids and everybody got busy. And we used to talk about role playing games and role playing game design and into war game design, because war games are, in my opinion, a huge section of role playing games in a way. Um, but something that came up a lot was people that make role playing games always have an intro that's what is a role playing game, and it just annoyed us so much because it's like in a war game or a Euro game, nobody starts the thing by saying, "Oh, what is a game? Let's define our subjects before we just."
Yeah. Although if you want to talk about what is a war game, get ready for an explosion.
Oh, it's a nightmare. But like over that time, I think one of the things that came out of it that we could generally agree with is that you can look at all sorts of things in terms of in the through the lens of this is a if we look at this as a game, what does that say about this thing? If we look at this as a story, if we look at this as a piece of art, if we look at this as a model of history, and the same kind of thing could be looked at and through all of these different lenses, and you can get interesting different things about out of them. So when we talk about fun, well, if we look at it as, oh, is this a fun thing? Well, there's lots of games that aren't fun. I mean, Dan Spacebiff talks about this much better than I do about
Oh
types of
yeah.
fun. And so definitely go check that kind of stuff out, right? But looking at something through that lens is not often helpful in wargaming in particular, and often in role-playing games either, especially modern indie role-playing games, because the experience that somebody's trying to get out of it, like fun tends to mean that you're making a comedy, I guess, where everything turns out okay at the
Yeah.
end and we're all happy about it. And a lot of good war games that I like are tragedies. And sometimes a tragedy is amazing, but it's not happy, right? It's not fun in a normal fun way. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of a complicated thing to talk about because it just doesn't mean very much. It's like saying, "Oh yeah, this is nice." Well, that's the least actionable comment you can make. But if I'm playing Here I Stand as the Habsburgs for 6 hours and I'm just slowly melting into the earth, that's fun. It's not a great time. It's kind of a tragedy, but it's a fun time. Yeah, it's just kind of a weird way to look at games.
All right. So speaking of, nice as a kind of a useless comment, how do you give comments on games, or how do you like to deliver them? Have you developed some sort of tricks or patterns that make the information clearer, but also easier for someone whose baby that is to digest?
I think that one of the biggest things, especially designer developer combo, right? As designers, when you play with people, especially like so many people have some kind of game design background that you're going to play with, or they want to design, or they feel like they know what they can do to design. A lot of the comments that are easy to get are, oh, you should do this. You should change this deck to do this thing, or you should add this die mechanic or something like that. And those I find are the least useful comments. And so I try not to give them as much as possible. Sometimes it's just so tempting to be like, oh, I know what would solve this right here. I've only seen your game for 5 minutes, but I'm sure that this would be a great, it's you gotta just hold your tongue, and it's so difficult. But so I find that the more helpful comments tend to be, this is the feeling that I'm getting. Is that what you're intending? This is using up all of my brain space. Is this the thing that you want to focus on? Or this thing is so huge, I don't know how to even get started. Is that okay? Is that the experience that you want? Because sometimes you want to just make everybody, like Mr. President is, make somebody understand how complicated the system is. That's almost the whole point of that kind of thing. So it's not a bad thing. A lot of game design advice I see is, oh, you should always make it simpler. You should always reduce. And it's like, well, it really kind of depends. So the comments that I like to give are much more on the, what kinds of things are you really looking for? Gary has a joke, because he goes to way more conventions and talks to designers than I do. And he has a joke that he's written down my list of comments that I tend to give our designs in our local group. And he'll just read them to the designers that he talks to, which is like, is this one game or should it really be 2 games, right? You're revealing new information right at the beginning of somebody's decision. Do you want to do that, or could it wait until after somebody's decision? Where is this randomness really going to be? Why are you using dice this way? Those kinds of things, right? Because it depends on really how experienced a designer is. But if you're working with a new designer, sometimes they just don't understand all of the tools that are available, right?
Yeah.
If you've grown up and you've only seen a certain type of game, then knowing that you could use cards for this instead of dice, or for that matter, dice instead of cards, or drawing from a bag or whatever, like there's a lot of tools that are available. And if I do give mechanical comments, it tends to be, hey, here's a tool, and I think you should consider how this might be useful. But experienced designers don't even need that kind of thing. It's just, oh yeah, I played this for 3 hours, and these 2 spots felt weird. Is that the intent, or is that not the intent? That's the best kind of comment. And when a designer is great, like when I was working with Gary in particular, we had been working for 15 years together, and so I can just be like, oh, this part here, it's kind of funky. You should think about that. And then the next day he'd come up with something that'd be great. So that's the best kind of development work. It's like super light touch.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
All right, so kind of talking about your own design work. So obviously, I looked up you on Board Game Geek before.
I have a bunch of weird
um,
things on BGG.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, you like have gone through this like kind of cool phase of doing a lot of like little print and play, kind of self-published, web published games, and I would like you to talk about those. Like, what drives that urge to create and to post, and how do you think that your early designs have like kind of show some development in you up to now?
Sure. I mean, so one of the things that we did in our group is we had like every week or every 2 weeks there was a design challenge. So I wrote like a random challenge roller or whatever, and then we sent it out by email. And it's like, okay, at the next meetup, bring a prototype that does this, and we're gonna play them. And so it's like rapid iteration on, I think that this is gonna work. Let's give it a shot. And you learn humility very quickly, as none of the ideas that you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be amazing, a bunch of them don't work, and it's like, oh, I understand the limits of my imagination much better. And so, a ton of those ideas the designs ended up on G Plus, which is gone now, or on Blogger, and I think I deleted my Blogger at one point. So I had like hundreds because we were doing this for a decade and every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Uh, so just loads of designs. But then I started working on, and a lot of those are, uh, how do we do this in a way that it's easy to prototype? Was those ideas. And how do we do this in a way that you could play in a half an hour to an hour so that we could play it at lunch or in a little break at the end of the workday? So I have loads of experience building those kinds of games. And I feel pretty good about my ability to like throw down a 45-minute light card game with a couple of cubes. Um, and so one of the fun things about that kind of design is that there's lots of tools that people have made that are just, here's a system, play around in this system, right? So I love to play with normal cards. Most of the decks of cards, playing cards that I have at home have some kind of writing around the outside as I've used them for prototyping. And I always am looking for new decks of cards to do that with. And then the deck tet also came up as this is a really cool thing that is not exactly a deck of cards, and it's not exactly a deck of tarot cards. And the guy behind it also printed out like chips that you can get. So there's additional components on top, and I've got cubes and I've got poker chips lying around. So if you want to make a game in a few seconds, it's like, oh, throw all this stuff on the table, we can make a game. So I've got a bunch of, that's when I started putting things on BGG as the deck tech games, they're all on BGG. And so if I want to make one of those and allow other people to play it, because that's my favorite thing, is making something and seeing people hopefully enjoy. Then, let's play around with these challenges and upload things that worked when we brought them to the prototype night. One of the rules in the game design group is that if you haven't played it, then it doesn't exist. So you're not allowed to talk about it until there's a prototype, until you played it. It's so easy to sit there and, I had this amazing idea and we're just going to sit here building it forever, right?
Yeah.
So I have a couple of deck tech games. There was for a while, there was like Hanamakoji came out, and then there was a bunch of I Split You Choose thinking. And so I was like, oh, I bet you could do a really cool I Split You Choose with deck tech. And that's really the game. Wouldn't that work? And so we built that. And then I love investment games. And so how do you build an investment game with just a deck of cards is a fun little challenge. There's a couple of other things that I built in there. And then there's, the interesting thing about roll 'em rights being that, well, it's just a piece of paper and a couple of dice. So that's really easy to prototype. So super fun. So I made a bunch of those, and a couple of them ended up showing up on BGG because I was like, oh, I want a place to put them. And that's great. And then there's one on there that is the forerunner to what became Echo, which is, I think it's called Rise and Fall of Galactic Empires or something on BGG.
Yes.
Yeah. That the joke in the local group is that I've made 15 versions of that game, and all of them are fun, and then I throw them away. So getting Echo on P500 is very much a forcing function to make one of them get printed. So we'll see how that goes. And maybe someday I'll Martin Wallace it and come back out and print out some old version of it at some point.
All right, so that brings us to Echo from the Dark, which is what I kind of want to spend the back half of this conversation talking about. So, yeah, so now I'm just curious, how did you choose which version of this game would become Echo from the Dark? Like, how do you choose a favorite among lots of odd little children?
I mean, the problem with this is a problem with art, I find. Not to get into games or art question, but I'm a musician and I do some other pieces of art as well. And so I think about it through that lens a lot. And there is just no perfect piece of art, right? And one of the problems with creation is that as you are climbing up that hill towards the point where you're like, oh yeah, this is the best thing, you are moving away from other places that are also great things. And as I'm climbing up the hill, one of the things that I love about games is learning new systems, is understanding new ideas, is seeing people see new things. And so the more climbing you're doing, uh, the more that you're like, oh, I understand this at this point. And so the less of that kind of fun I get to have playing in the system. And so as I'm working on Red Dust Rebellion, there are a lot of things that Red Dust Rebellion made me think about old versions of this game. One of the big ones is that I had light ideas about what insurgency would look like in these things, but my first versions of this were in 2010, which is even before before Andy and Abyss came out, and so I didn't have any good tools for working on it, and I'm not Voco, so I'm not even thinking about it as a way of talking about history. And so working on Red Dust Rebellion, I go, well, if I applied these tools to that idea, where would that go? Red Dust Rebellion does a thing with population that most coin games don't. I think Brian Train's Colonial Twilight about Algeria has population that moves, but Red Dust does crazy amounts of population manipulation. And I was like, well, if this is something that you could reasonably do in this system, maybe that's a thing I could yank in, because that kind of a growth idea is necessary for an epic story. And so I'd always been doing it by placing cards and laying cubes out and that kind of thing in prior versions. But one of the bigger reasons is this is a big game about sci-fi that I love, and it's in an established series. And like I said, I want to work on something for GMT, but all of my games are new games. And so when I talk to people there, they're like, well, it's easier to print something if it's an established series, because nobody knows who I am. Nobody cares about what I say about Napoleonics at that point. But if I make a coin game about sci-fi, then that's already going to get people who are interested in coin, and that's a pretty large audience. So I was like, well, I'll throw Ozymandias, which is my internal working title for that game. I'll throw Ozymandias into the coin system, and we'll see what comes out. See if it works at all. So we messed around with it for about a year at the tail end of the RDR development, and we were like, yeah, this could work. This could work really well, actually. And because it's in an established series, I was like, oh, we'll start here. And they're like, okay, we can do that. It's reasonable. So whether it's my favorite version of the system, I don't know if it's my favorite version. But I think it's the most printable version.
Fair enough. All right, we're going to come back to the system in a second, but what are you trying to say with Echo for the Dark? So somebody's going to have to develop you and try to get your voice out.
Oh, yeah. Joe's developing me. He's great. That's the conversations that I tend to have with Joe are, this thing is inspired by classic sci-fi, mostly classic sci-fi. And then, there's what is it? Arcady Martin has printed some stuff recently, and who's the ancillary sword author? I can't remember. But there's some really modern statements on Empire in sci-fi that are cool in this space too. But the idea of the 4X sci-fi game is just a fun kind of space to play in general. But all of those games tend to use the pre-coin concept of area control and movement and that kind of stuff. And so it started to bother me after I played Andy and Abyss and Cuba Libre and the Distant Plane. It was like we'd go back and play Eclipse or Twilight Imperium, and it's like, well, I took your planet, and now everything's gone. Now you can't do anything. There aren't any rebels here. There's nobody fighting back. There's no complaints. This is a 6-resource planet, and now they're just all my resources. Like, that's just started to become really annoying and kind of wild to think about, that this does not affect anything,
No, it was just only resources there. That's the
yeah. It's weird, right? And I mean, even in 2010, the goal of this game was to do rise and fall. There needed to be a way for you to be an empire at one point and then not be an empire. And so just having the words to say that in a game, that was what all of these different versions were. Is like, where is the right words to be able to say that you were nothing and now you're something and now you're nothing again? Um, and so that's a huge piece of this. Another huge piece of this, all of the player powers are humans, because from my perspective, there's enough difference in humanity that you don't need to have an alien to do some of the sci-fi stuff that I think is interesting. And so, how do we show, coming off of something like A Distant Plane, where you understand, or I feel like I understand the goals so well, uh, and even just a small change in objective dramatically changes how you approach the game and the play and turn by turn, and you can create such conflict by just slightly misaligning two people's goals. And that's something that the system does really well. And leaning into that kind of thing with this and saying, you could take any groups of people, and if their goals are slightly misaligned, you're going to have conflict.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to have a bunch of different factions. It's like, well, we're not talking about a specific piece of sci-fi. We're talking about, let's talk about humanity in general and just grab a little slice. There's going to be a problem. It doesn't matter what slice you have. So that's the thing I hope I hope I'm saying in this system. So
Excellent. I'm sure you talked about it some elsewhere, but we will talk about it. So this is going to be an irregular conflict series
yes,
game. So, Red Dust Rebellion is coin, technically.
technically.
Um, did Echo from the Dark start coin and then just slide into regular conflicts, or did you always want to go ICS?
No, Echo from the Dark started before we had conceived of ICS.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
that's true. Yeah, yeah.
you know, the one of the things about series names. So this is me and not GMT, because I'm not the person who makes the GMT
Yes.
decisions in this space. But this is my understanding of series names, is that a huge piece of what you put on the box and in the marketing material is to make sure that the audience that wants the game finds it, and the audience that's not interested stays out, right? You don't want everybody to buy the thing, because that just means you're going to have a bunch of people who aren't going to like it, and that's not a place you want to be. And so with Red Dust Rebellion, we had a bunch of folks find it and say, oh, this is sci-fi, therefore it's going to be simpler because it's not tethered to history, so it doesn't have to be complicated. And it's like, well, Jay wanted to make a complicated game. That's that we did what we wanted to do, but we didn't tell people well enough, in my opinion, that this is what this thing is going to be. And so one of the things that we thought was that the coin branding is, this is about the idea of insurgency and counterinsurgency. And that's how I always thought about it. But we certainly have a large customer base who doesn't think about it that way, who thinks about, if you're doing a coin game, it should be modern, it should be historical, it should look like the kind of counterinsurgency that Andean Abyss is, or the
Yeah.
kind of counterinsurgency that Distant Plane is. And so when we go into like Falling Sky or Pendragon, like the ancient Roman stuff, or if we go into the sci-fi stuff, suddenly that, especially to this market segment, doesn't feel like coin. And so putting that label on the box confuses that group of people, especially. It also makes it really hard to talk about. When we talk about coin to game designers, it's like, oh, that means this kind of system. But the further and further you move from that system, the less that coin even really means, right? So then Fred's like, hey, I've got this Robin Hood game. And we're like, oh, I mean, inspired by coin, I guess. To game designers, it's like, this is totally coin. But to normal people, it's, from a distance, maybe. It's using coin like saying it's a deck builder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of these deck builders have something in common, but it's not always the most useful way to talk about them. And you certainly aren't going to make it a brand on the box. It's just too generic. So for ICS, we have a few goals, I think, around can we widen things a little bit more, for one? And for two, can we do a bit more with the other parts of the marketing material to get people to understand where these things are positioned, right? So we have Vijaya Nagara, which is simpler, about an interesting topic, and with a really interesting three-player dynamic. And then we go into Robin Hood, which is obviously fictional, well, partially fictional. Well, that's a Fred designer note question, I guess. We go into Cross Bronx Expressway, which is, I think, when we talk about MBSP's work, trying to model stuff that is not a traditionally wargame topic.
Yeah.
Trying to model that kind of stuff with wargame dynamics is such an interesting way to go. But I think those things kind of show everybody, hopefully, what the series is intended to say. It's still a very wide range of stuff, which makes it really tricky. For me, I was thinking immediately as coin. And I think if we were still in 2019, 2020, it might have been a coin. But as soon as we decided, oh yeah, we can do ICS, and ICS means we can go further from the formula, a lot of the bigger changes to the system came around then.
Interesting. So actually one thing I do want to talk about is, you mentioned for looking at Red Dust Rebellion that you were interested in making sure that certain sci-fi narratives were, kind of bled into that design. You talked about this one, Echo for the Dark, as like being based on like a classic sci-fi. I'm not a sci-fi expert. I actually used to think I hated sci-fi until Cole made me read Aurora, and I was like, oh.
Nice, yeah.
Um, so when you're talking about these kind of different strains of sci-fi and kind of like underpinnings, it sounds kind of like almost like doing a lit review, right, for a historical game. So how does that look to you? And like literarily, like what do you understand as like the foundation for your game?
Well, I mean, let's start there then. Isaac Asimov's Foundation, mid 20th century. He was inspired by the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, like that series, right? Full historical topic. And he goes, can we tell a story about that? And then how do we pull that further into what other weird things could they have done? Could they have preserved anything? Could they have solved this problem? And I have a bunch of lit review that I could go send you on about kind of the history and development of science fiction as a genre, down to stuff like Frankenstein and whatever.
I might actually make you do that after this, but
I've got a whole doc. I'll send it to you. But like the genre kind of, there's a piece of it that is a little post-colonial where we say, oh, well, in the middle of colonial, I guess, where we say that there's something just over that hill, and what crazy thing could it possibly be, is almost the beginning of sci-fi as a classic genre, is just what's around the corner. We found these people and they are completely different to anything we've ever seen before, right? Which is, looking back, horrendous. But the foundation of the genre is this idea of how might things be different, and how can we explore that space. And as you go forward through World War II and post World War II era, sci-fi switches from this idea of what new thing might be around the corner as a kind of the primary motivator of the genre, into what is empire and what is colonialism and what does this mean, both forwards and backwards. Like you have even H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds is kind of a reverse colonialism story, as what does this look like from the people that are being taken, right? So we get to Foundation, which is the empire story, in my opinion. And Asimov tells, like, it doesn't read very well now. Like Asimov writes like a 50s news reporter. And so it's got that kind of a feel to it. I still like it as a story, but I wouldn't recommend it necessarily. But the kind of ideas in there are these groups of people and how do they react to each other and how do they pull the levers on all of these interactions from kind of a distant thing. And everything, really a ton of modern empire sci-fi is either a reaction to Foundation or uh, a Foundation seen through a slightly different lens, or a Foundation just taken and serial numbers filed off type stuff, right?
So it was foundational.
Yeah, yeah, in a legitimate way. Um, so I read through those books every so often. Dune is from the 50s, and I read through those books all the time. I'm reading through them right now. And Dune is Frank Herbert thinking about modern conflicts, especially for resources, for important resources, and then being inspired by some ecological work in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, around some beaches that they were going to try and lock down because the sand was taking over an area in the Pacific Northwest, and he just thought that was so cool. Um, so those concepts stretched out into, well, who's going to inhabit this world? Why are they fighting over this thing? What are they, what is this going to turn into? So you've got a lot of sci-fi that's looking at really historically motivated topics, if not current world topics. And then how do we talk about this thing in a way that doesn't make people immediately frustrated or upset because we're, saying the Catholics are bad or something, right?
Yeah.
If you put all of that stuff into a slightly different dressing, you can talk about it, or at least sci-fi authors can talk about it reasonably well, a little bit more pointedly, I guess, than you
Yeah.
can in a paper that you want more people to read. Like,
Yeah.
certainly more people have read Dune than have thought seriously about the oil war in the Middle East and how does that affect all of the people living there, and so find that my favorite sci-fi is in that kind of space. That's certainly not all sci-fi. There's a lot of sci-fi that's just let's shoot things with lasers, and it's kind of a uh, you know, cool little adventure story. But the stuff that I like tends to be a history with the serial numbers filed off and expanded.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense actually. It's funny that you say like sci-fi is like kind of a way to talk about issues because I think that if you're distant from it, history does it too. Like it's easier to talk about, oh wow, what happens to a republic when people break the rules and they don't
Totally.
respect the constitution anymore? Like
Yes.
what could happen?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. Like, for we can, you can absolutely today you could write a Fall of Rome story
Yeah.
and color it heavily, right? Um, and so there's a world where Echo is just a Rome story. But one of the problems with using history for that kind of thing is I really should only be talking about that historical period, and I
Right.
can color it and say, what does this mean for today? But I can't be like, oh, and there's also this island of these people who are doing these things. It's like, well, now we're moving into strange places. Um, and so the thing about having any groups of people are going to cause conflict, that's much harder to do from a historical basis for sure.
Yeah. So in addition sort of to any groups can have conflict between themselves, what are you like putting down that you want people who play your game to pick up?
Ooh, it feels like cheating. To just tell people. That's terrible.
Ooh, see, that's a good answer in itself. That's interesting. Like,
I mean, there's stuff that I really appreciate about playing this with wargamers and with non-wargamers about how they role play the given factions.
okay.
Um, I I hope that I can make, like, there's a common thing in storytelling recently where everybody's the bad guy. And it's like we're all gray areas and nobody's really in the right, and isn't everything just terrible, right? Um, and there's a common thing in really classic sci-fi where everybody's basically the good guy, except for one obviously bad guy. And that doesn't feel right either. So I'm hoping to get people into a situation where you could understand why this faction might want these things and
Yeah.
why they might be willing to do these things in order to get there. Like, the the ideal world of playing a distant plane to me is not that you say, oh yeah, the Taliban are great people, but you can understand why they might be pushed in this direction.
Right.
Um, and it's like, oh, I understand, but I disagree is fine, or I understand, but it sucks is also fine. Um, and so trying to figure out how to do that with, especially, I have a faction that's kind of uh, accelerationist, apocalyptic. Like,
Yeah.
let's just burn it all down and then we'll rebuild something better afterwards. And tuning that faction so that the role playing feels like that and doesn't just feel like, hey, we're the evil cultists or whatever, is
Yeah.
really tricky. So hopefully I'll get there, but we'll see. It's fun. It's a good time either way. But if it just says we're the bad guys, then that's it will be sad for me, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, some people just want to be bad, but
Yeah,
we like we
100%.
like we like a little bad with nuance in this culture, right? So,
Yeah. I hope to give people room to play either way for sure. Like there's an Empire faction that starts in control of like everything, and it's so
yeah.
fun watching people play that thing. I've had people play the Empire in a way that they're like, oh, we're just trying to make sure that everything's okay. And oh yeah, absolutely, you can bring your people in here, and don't worry, I don't mind if you have alignment. I'm just trying to tax, and those kind of nice Empire players, right? And I've also had Empire players. The Empire always goes last on the first turn for faction specific stuff, and the first round ends, and the Empire's about to go, and they go, so why don't I just shoot everybody? It's like, well, you can do that. It's not against the rules. Talk to your fellow players about what that will do for the rest of your game, but it's up to you.
Yeah. All right. So I've had you just about an hour. So even though we could keep going, I'm just going to give you some softy questions. But
Hit it.
you're getting an extra softy question because you're also a reader. So, you mentioned that you wouldn't necessarily recommend Foundation. What is a sci-fi book that you would recommend that people should go read? If it's sort of like a starter one.
I mean, there's a couple of automatics, and so we'll skip those. Um, Dune Foundation, Left Hand of Darkness, that kind of stuff. If you want to read a modern piece of sci-fi, Ancillary Sword, I think, is the one I would start with as this is what sci-fi can be these days. There's I've had Memory of Empire recommended to me a couple of times, and I need to go read it like really soon. I can't directly recommend it because I haven't read it yet. But yeah, Ancillary Sword's the big one for me.
Nice. And then what games have you been playing recently that you have enjoyed?
Oof, that's a great question. I mean, I just played a bunch of Taylor Schuss's games at SD HistCon, but none of them are published, so I don't know if that's fair to talk about.
I think fair enough. I think he'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean,
Did you play the dexterity flicking game?
Oh my gosh, he's got a dexterity game that is magnets, the dexterity worker placement game, because you got
Yes.
magnets in your workers, and it is such a genius idea because I love game designs where you can give just kind of a one sentence pitch and the players understand the whole game. It's so beautiful and it's really annoying. It's like I've been playing a lot of the Gang recently, which is poker
Yeah.
but cooperative. And
Yeah.
as soon as you see the components, it's like, oh yeah, this is I get it. It's just really painful as a designer to go, yeah, that makes sense. I could have thought of that if I was only a little bit smarter. Yeah, really, really painful. It's the holiday season, so we're playing lighter things these days. So I play a lot of cockroach poker when we go to
Nice.
family nights because it's a similar kind of thing, and everybody can play it. Gosh, I feel like I should have a heavier game that I can talk about. I just got Armageddon War, which is not a new game, but it has a revolving chip pull activation system, and I love the idea of chip pull as a way of throwing in some fog of war and like communication randomness. A Victory Lost is one of my favorite games of all time, and so I'm gonna try and steal some things from that for a couple of designs that I have. But those are some of the more recent stuff that I've been playing around.
Nice. And then, if people want to follow your work online and kind of see what you're up to, where do you like to be found?
Where do I like to be found?
Yeah.
In person. I'm not online very much. I'm on Blue Sky technically. I think it's blinks.itch.io on Blue Sky. And that's also where I publish some of the simpler things that I make. Uh, but I'm not very public about things. So probably if you want to follow me on there and then bother me, then I'll respond to whatever. I'm also on the Coin Players Club as Blinks, so that I could follow the Red Dust Rebellion development and post development work, but also talk about Echo when somebody asks, because I'm just not good at doing the marketing.
Well, I'm looking forward to Echo. So
Excited.
I'll make sure to post when it's out. So
You're the best.
if people listening don't know, I'm everywhere as Beyond Solitaire, so you can find me. Although you won't find the podcast for about a month and a half because this is the end of the season. I'm gonna go on break for a little bit, as I always do between podcast seasons. But Adam, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me for a bit and just making this like a nice chill end to season 11.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good time.
All right, everybody out there, please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.